Hello, everybody. Welcome to 3 Point Perspective, the podcast about illustration, how to do it, how to make a living at it, and how to make an impact in the world with your art. I'm Jake Parker.
I'm Lee White.
And I'm Will Terry. And all three of us are professional illustrators. We've all worked for all the major publishers in the business. Together, we've published somewhere around 75 children's books, and we've all taught illustration at university art programs.
That's right. Each week we come at you guys with great illustrator interviews or listener questions. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we argue, but each time you learn something brand spanking new.
That's right. Today we wanted to talk to you guys about this project we've been working on, how to fix your art. We've mentioned it a few times before on the podcast, but it's been going on here for almost a year on our YouTube channel. It's a live stream we do every month where we essentially wanted to give people the tools, the understanding of how to fix their own art, right? And one of the things that we've learned from, how long did we do Critique Arena? We did
Years.
it for 35 months, something like that, 40 months. So however many years that is. Every month people would submit art. We would pick a top 16 and then we would critique. We do some level of critique.
This is in conjunction with SVSLearn.com for
right.
anybody who's listening. Yeah.
And
that
so,
doesn't know.
Right, exactly. And so people would submit their artwork. We would critique it. Some points of it, we would critique the ones that didn't get into the top 16. At some point, we were critiquing the ones that did get into the top 16. Or we would critique the ones that won and explain why they won or whatever reason, okay? And what we kept seeing were very consistent problems. They didn't do this, they didn't do that, or you should have done this a little bit differently. We were seeing these same things over and over, and we realized that the best way to serve this community wasn't to have a contest every month, but was to essentially teach them, instead of providing a fish, to teach people how to fish. Like, here's how you can fix your art. And so we embarked on this 10-month long project to every month teach a lecture broken down into like these basic fundamentals, teach a lecture, and then take some artwork and apply those principles from that lecture to how to fix that art. And so now every third Thursday, we have people submitting artwork. We pick one or two of them, and we go in and we show, here's, compositionally, this is how it could be better, or story-wise, this is how it could be better, or structure and character design-wise, this, color, lighting, all those things. But what we've done in conjunction with that is created a document, a PDF document book that essentially takes all these lectures that we've done and distills all that knowledge into like really easy to understand, step by step, point by point instruction on how you can fix your art. Do you want to
quickly and
go into
easily,
that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, it's just like every project that we start at SVS. It sort of starts small and simple, and it grows, but it can't grow too big. That's kind of your metric, is like, how do I make this thing usable? And then still cover all the bases. And so we started out with the idea of a checklist, just a simple checklist that would go out. And it was just, all of us sort of do some version of that, where when I finish an illustration, I go around the illustration, I look for tangents or some other compositional thing, or I have just a little checklist that I go through. So it was going to start with just a single checklist. And we're like, well, it should have something that goes with it, so you can kind of refer back to what that checklist item is going to be. And so we just started adding, we came up with all the sections that we thought it would be. It's 8 different sections, which we're going to talk about today. And then we, thought, what's the most usable way to explain each one of these things? It's not a start from scratch. Like, if you don't know anything about perspective and you go to the, art store and you buy a book on perspective, just that book on perspective could be hundreds of pages long. We don't want to do that. We want this book to be for mid-level sort of artists who have taken a class already and then need the kind of the just the most important parts of each thing. Rendering, perspective, storytelling, composition, light and shadow, all that stuff. Well, it ended up growing, starting with the checklist and coming up with these 8 sections, ended up growing to about 211 pages of heavy-hitting, simple concepts that we wanted, instead of doing a class, by the way. So you might ask, like, why didn't we just do a class on this that is just all video based? And we wanted something that's sort of more referenceable. A while back, I had ordered a PDF from a mountain bike fitness guy, and that's sort of where this started from. It was like this checklist of like, oh, you want to be a good mountain biker? Are you doing this? Are you doing this? And it was just so easy to use. I thought that's what we need for art, because we have, all the whole curriculum at SVSLearn. It's like 24 classes. Well, that's going to take you a year to go through. You can't just sit at your desk and go through that. It's too big. So this is just a fantastic reference that we put together. It enables people to just create an illustration. You go through the checklist. We can make your illustration better. I guarantee it. There's no way you could go through this checklist and not make it better. And it just highlights all the important points for doing each one of these things that makes a good illustration. So today we thought it would be fun to go through each of those sections, and we were going to talk about sort of the main mistakes that we've seen students make in each one of these sections. And we'll just go in order and see how it goes.
But before you do, let me just say this.
Yep.
I'm going to take credit for the idea of how to fix your art. Is that all right?
Oh, it was a combo. Will had the idea that it was going to be a class, so he did come up with the idea of how to fix your art, and then I came up with what the format was going to be.
And so that's not, and I don't care about, I'm not looking for a pat on the back, but I just want to go into what my frustration was and why I wanted to do this. We would do Critique Arena, right? And we would end up out of a field of 100 or 120, 30, 40 people entering, we would end up critiquing 16. And often it was the same people, right?
Right.
And so some of the people were going, well, how come you're critiquing the same people? Well, we voted on like what were the top 16, and then we would have them face off basically. So the problem that we were trying to solve is the people that weren't getting picked for the top 16 weren't getting a critique, and they were feeling like there's nothing here for me. I'm not getting any help. I'm not getting any better. The thing that I really wanted to stress, though, is there's a point in your career as an artist where you learn to self-critique, right? You like Lee, when you do a painting now, you do a drawing and a painting, you know exactly what it needs. You don't have to run it by anybody else. You choose to sometimes, but you don't have to.
You know deep down. Yeah. It's instantaneous once you've gone through it enough.
And I think what it is you've done enough work over enough time. You've done enough crap to where you're not married to, you've learned not to get married to the work that you've put into something. In other words, if you work hard on something and it's not working, you'd rather scrap it, change it, start over, whatever. The only thing that you care about is coming up with a really good piece, because that's the only way you're going to make money, either in the gallery.
That's right.
Or,
and I was having this conversation actually with my agent at a party the other night, and it was the conversation that we were having with a group of artists, that the biggest difference between pros and amateurs is the willingness to totally scrap something or change important elements in it. Like I did an illustration yesterday that was just a sample piece for a new book that I'm writing. I know the character has to change. I didn't get the pose right. I already know that. I went ahead and did it just because it was a concept piece. Mm-hmm. But when it comes down to really doing it, I have to change that character because I already have that red flag that's gone up. Hey, your storytelling's not good enough with this character and what you did. The pose, the clothing, maybe even need to age her down a little bit. That's the difference between a pro, is that it's like, it's not right. Okay, I'll go fix it.
Right. And in that gap between when you're at a point where you feel like you don't know whether your piece is good. I mean, like art, we'd have students that go they're totally surprised. And I remember when I was going to school, I'd go to school with my piece that I had made for the class assignment. This is at BYU. And I'm like, I hope my teacher likes it. I didn't know whether it was good or not. And that's what I'm seeing in a lot of our students. They don't know if we're going to go, this is amazing, or if we're just going to completely ignore it. And so the hope for how to fix your art is to accelerate the time between when you don't know whether your art is good to whether you do based on specific metrics and being able to go through each one. And what it will really come down to is how honest each artist is with themselves as they go through this list, right? Because one of the things that, I think artists are eternal optimists in a lot of ways, because we're hopeful and we want to make the world a better place with our art, and we just want to make good stuff. And so we're optimistic that we did make something good. And in the beginning, we usually don't. And that's what this is for, is to help us to see where we need to improve, to get to that point where you can throw away this list, because it's all, at that point, essentially muscle memory. It's like a golf swing. There's 200 things you got to remember in a golf swing, but they have to become things
all
you don't
second
think
nature,
about.
right?
Yeah.
And each one of those things you had to focus on that at the moment,
Right.
and then that becomes part of your process. It's true. And I should add, I'm going to add two things here. There's a gap that's really weird with art education. I think everybody goes through it, where you can recognize what is good, you know the basics, but then you're not doing it yet. I just want to say, like, basically your knowledge and your ability are I'm just going to throw a number out there, are 6 months apart. Mm-hmm. And it's a frustrating moment. It's just important to know that happens, because it's frustrating, because you're like, I can recognize it. I know when people are doing it right. I just can't do it yet. Yep. But it's there. And so I think that's the sweet spot where this book will really help you get there to what you're seeing, and sort of matching what you're seeing in your mind versus what's on the page. And I will say this also as encouragement. I'll give you a little disc golf analogy, the zen of disc golf. There's this rating system for a disc golf round. It's just a number that your round gets rated. It's 0 to 300, 300 being an absolutely perfect round, and scoring in the top like 1% of the planet. And then, if for a beginner, your score might be, let's just say 100. In the beginning, as you improve, the strokes are worth the points are worth less money. Less jump. Like if you scored a plus 23 one time and you got a plus 20, your score is going to go up a little bit. What that means is, in the beginning, it's easier to get better, so the value is not placed on that moment. It's harder to get better once you're a pro. Like a beginner, you could hear one thing and your art jumps 50% better.
Yeah.
Or you could learn a color theory and all of a sudden you're better. And so my point is, as you get better and better, those jumps become smaller,
right,
and harder to do. So they're worth more later, actually. But you could be jumping in your ability in the early stages, and so a lot of you guys are going to be frustrated as beginners, as novices. But the jumps happen dramatically, and then they slow down as you get to being a really advanced level or even pro. I mean, when's the last giant leap forward in your ability, Will, that you can remember?
In illustration?
Yeah. Can you remember where you were career. Literally, you're like, one day you're this level and you learn something, and the next day you're different?
Well, it's been a really long time.
Yeah.
So those big jumps come. I remember probably one that stuck out the most was being pointed out by a fellow illustrator that I was just oversaturating my color everywhere and not giving any relief. And I never had anybody. It reminds me of that Seinfeld. And I'm dating myself because nobody watches Seinfeld anymore. But there was a time where this guy broke up with Elaine, and they're like, the friends were all like, "Be careful when you date this guy, because if you break up, he'll ruin your life with like insults and stuff." So his insult for her was that she had a big head, right? You remember that? And then like she's like, "That's all you got? That's it? That's nothing." And then everything started happening. Like her head was too big and blocking people, and like birds were flying into her hair, and just all sorts of stuff. So this former Caldecott winner, David Small, I asked him for a critique, and he pulled no punches, and he was like, "You just use so much damn color everywhere." And if you look at my early work,
that's a good one.
Yeah, there was no I didn't have any, I was trying to do that. I thought that was good. I didn't understand emphasis really, so I was like emphasizing everything. And when you emphasize everything, you have chaos. It's like a crowded room of people all talking and you can't really zero in on any one conversation. Right.
Right.
And as soon as, he said that, and I was like, that's all you got, that's it. Like, that's nothing.
Right. That's a groundbreaking crit right there.
In fact, I, for the next couple weeks, was going around telling my wife, like, the guy doesn't know what he's talking about, like I fought it, I'm like he doesn't understand how much people love my color. And, if you're honest with yourself, then, what happened after that was I had to have a, kind of a question. Do I use too much color? And, there were some other things he said, like you need to leave relief so that when you have something to say, you can really punch it with the color,
Right.
And I'm like, and I started looking at other art in a different light and going, oh, I see. That was probably the last thing.
The biggest one that I haven't had a giant breakthrough like that in a little while. That's a big one that you're talking about. Probably the biggest, like, kind of groundbreaking thing that I learned is that you don't always have to have a horizon line or a line at like if you're doing an interior, that you have to have a line where the bottom of where the floor meets the wall. Mm-hmm. Once that line goes away, the composition possibilities are endless, and nobody misses that line. Nobody thinks like, oh, they're standing on the wall, or everybody sort of magically sort of implies that it's there.
Right.
And that was just so transformative. The other thing that I remember that really changed my idea was, this is kind of groundbreaking. I think I still think about it and think that it's groundbreaking, is that if you go to school, you're taught sort of that we're looking through a window, kind of like you're looking through a camera, and that's how we draw. So like we're looking around with the camera, that's our point of view. And if I point my camera out my window here, you're going to see the street, you're going to see the telephone poles, you're going to see the houses, you're going to see the rec center, all the stuff that's out there, right? Traffic lights, all that stuff. And I realized later that we're not a camera. We're not, I don't need to do that in my illustrations. I need to edit it down. And so I started thinking of my compositions and my images like a play. And so if you're going to see a play and you go to see the play and it's set in New York, they're not going to put a whole street scene of New York in there to try to tell you that it's New York. They're going to put like a hot dog stand, a light post, maybe a silhouette of the Empire State Building in the background. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, that's New York.
Yeah.
Don't need anything else. And if you start thinking of it like a play set versus a window to the world, all of a sudden I can leave out all that stuff. And so now that's what I think to myself. What's the 4 things I need to tell you something's a cat? What's the 4 things I need to tell you we're in Russia? Like it's crazy if you think of it like that. It simplifies your images dramatically.
Yeah.
Well, let's go
I
through
actually have an exercise that I do in my school visits on editing, and I give them a prompt and I show this, like kind of like what you said, this huge scene of buildings and everything, all the superfluous stuff going on that doesn't need to be there. And the story's really about a little cat, and you can see the cat in there. And I keep editing out all this stuff until we end up with just the cat walking up the stairs like it's talking about,
Right.
And, trying to teach that to kids that, when you're illustrating your own stories, it's what you can leave out that's more important almost.
Yeah. It's hard to learn because in the beginning you want to fill every square inch. By the way, I learned that the other night at the party that my agent was having, that there is a word for wanting to fill every inch of a canvas.
Oh, really?
I can't remember what it is. I'll have to send him a text and see what that word is. But one of the guys there had it, and that's the reason he was talking about it. He's I can't leave it alone. I have to keep going and keep going.
Clutter everything, clutter.
No, it's not a take on a word like a clutterism or something like that. It's a completely different word. Never heard it before. If you guys know it, maybe put it in the comments if anybody knows what it is. But we wanted to go through, let's go ahead and dive through because we got 8 sections to go through. I don't even know if we may have to split this podcast into 2 parts. But our first section is story. Maybe let's list a couple of things with story that we see that's mistakes that
well, and we
make.
could just talk about these generally too. We don't have to go through every little thing, but unless we do.
We don't have to. I mean, it's just general, but like in terms of story, what's the main thing that you see that people have a problem with?
The main thing is people will come up with a boring story. And the thing that I've used in my classes is whenever you make an illustration, verbalize it like this. Start out like this. Because when you make an illustration, you're telling people something, right? You're making a statement. And in your statement, if it's a fire hydrant, if it's a picture of a fire hydrant, you're going, hey world, guess what? Fire hydrant, right?
Right, here's a fire hydrant.
Yeah.
Right.
And now if there's a dog peeing on the fire hydrant, hey world, there's a dog peeing on a fire hydrant. Still not very exciting, you know?
Right.
And then you could have, maybe I don't know, the fireman getting ready to use the hose, and now the dog's going to pee on the fire hydrant, but you see the fireman ready to blast him or something, hey world, the dog might pee, but he might get blasted. Now there's actually some story happening there. But it's surprising how many people will say, hey world, guess what? A kid eating an ice cream cone. And the thing is, most people just aren't going to care. There's nothing emotionally to change them, to make them care. And so that's
I gotta say, man, I
thing.
love that technique. I don't like giving you a compliment, but breaking it down as simple as just saying, okay, explain your illustration, and is that answer interesting in any way? I remember we were doing a how to critique your arena one time, and somebody had done this illustration. It had all, like I was saying earlier, it was a window to the world. There was cars in the background, there was people in the background, and there was a car in the foreground, and somebody was running, and she was pressing her lock the keys button on the key fob.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember it because so much work had gone into this thing, and so using your technique was, hey, this person's late. There was nothing there.
Yeah.
And we, especially in a contest situation where like a lot of you guys are building portfolios, we do see, I agree with Will, that's the number one problem is like you self-limited yourself. Like as a pro, you're going to do boring illustrations because they almost sometimes force you to, and you got to try to make an illustration interesting. Mm-hmm. But for your portfolio, man, you can swing for the fences, make something, here's a castle in the sky with waterfalls coming down, and, go nuts, like make something big and interesting and beautiful.
I've noticed that our students will take, often in doing how to fix your art, they'll take something that is a famous saying or something like when pigs fly,
mm-hmm.
and they'll illustrate it. And I'm like thinking, it was funny when the first person said when pigs fly, maybe the second
right.
or third, but to illustrate it,
so
100 years later is, we know about that phrase.
Unless
but
you
what
add
is,
something
what are,
to
yeah,
it.
what are you doing different? What's your twist on when pigs fly? And they often don't go there. And I would estimate that out of our students, if we get 100 pieces for how to fix your art, maybe 10% to 20% have a story.
Mm-hmm.
The rest are,
it's
hey,
always going to
everybody,
be
guess what?
more interesting with the story.
An elephant holding a balloon.
Right.
I would say, well,
ahead,
let me just pipe in here. I've been really quiet this whole time because I had to take a phone call, so I'm sorry.
Yeah, Jake left. He thought that was more important than you guys.
I'll explain later. But I think our work, 3 of us, really what we have been focusing on over the last 5 years doing this stuff isn't so much how to make a technically sound image, but more so how to tell a good story. Mm-hmm. And we look at all different levels of artwork, and there's some really good people who've contributed, and there's some people who just started drawing like last week who've contributed, and we kind of look past. We look past the quality of work, the quality, like the technical quality of
The
work,
mechanics and
the mechanics of
rendering.
it,
Yeah.
and zero in on that story. Because if you have a good story, if you have a good take on something, if you're, if you have like a unique idea that hasn't been seen before, it really doesn't matter how good you are as an artist.
Yeah.
All that is just gravy on top. And we always cite like Gary Larson, or Matthew Inman, who their art is serviceable. It's inherently funny, but technically not, savvy, right? And in a way that actually helps their work a little bit. You don't want some things to be too overly rendered. So really it comes down to like these two branches of work. You better have a really good story or you better have really killer art. And if you can do both, you're gonna really have some success here. But
Yeah.
you have to have at least one of those.
And really the art, the visual art only has to match the story style. So it doesn't have to be, when you say really great art, I would add to that it has to be really great art for your storytelling.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be you're a super creative storyteller and you've got this highly rendered style. Not at all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna show an image real quick because I want to talk about like an example of going through that process real quick. I don't want to make it a big crit or anything like that, but I had this idea to do a penguin reading a book, and I thought that would just be a cute image. And I drew it up, I sketched it up, just penguin sitting there reading a book. So it's already got a little bit of an asterisk that we don't normally see penguins reading books. They're always in the snow and stuff like that. So I thought that was my initial idea. This just a cute image, whatever. But I drew it and I was like, there is, like Will said, there is nothing there. Look, the penguin's reading a book or whatever. And, not wanting to tell a giant story or come up with a whole narrative, I had to figure out a way to make that interesting. I'll show you what I did. And I've sold this image so many times commercially as a licensing image and also as a print and stuff like that. So basically what I changed it to, for those of you guys who aren't seeing our YouTube, is have a penguin there with a bike. Don't even ask how a penguin rides a bike, but he's sitting under this tree. And then the book is starting to flap away. And by the time it gets away, it turns into this bird. And so just adding something. I didn't add anything else. I didn't add houses. I didn't complicate the image or anything. But I've sold this image many times.
We know what he's reading about, right?
I don't know. It's just the idea. The title of the print is possibilities. So maybe the concept is whatever. When you read, you kind of expand your mind. I don't know what the concept is, but you have to make it interesting in some way. And like me and Will were talking about, the ability to stop yourself and say, what I'm drawing is maybe not going to be that interesting. I need to do something. Is the mark of you leveling up.
Absolutely. Have you gone over the checklist at all
So we're just talking about each section a little bit. We just started with story.
Yeah, we're just going to list kind of the main problems that we see with each one. The checklist will show you how to solve this. We don't need to go into that.
Right. But that's why we put story as number one. Because if you don't start with a good story, you're just wasting your time. You really are.
Can I add one thing that I see from beginners a lot that sort of drives me crazy? And I did the same thing, so I'm not exempt from this group. It sort of has to do with a concept mixed with composition, but the idea that the main payoff of an image happens in a reflection. I see it happen all the time. For example, like it's a close-up of a face, and then in the eye is reflected some other thing that we're supposed to be looking at that changes the nature of it. Or somebody's looking in a mirror and what the payoff is behind them, or a window pane, or even in How to Fix Your Art, the last one we did, there was a reflection of a bird in this pond. So we're looking across this whole landscape, and then we have to notice the reflection and then have to somehow process that information. I never see pros do that. Never.
If you see it, it is done so expertly. Like I remember seeing where the entire illustration was the reflection, and you're seeing just a hint of...
So sort of the MC Escher ball, where really it's just the hand holding the ball, and then we see the whole room. There just better be a really good reason for doing the reflection. But I've just noticed you got to think about two things. How hard is a concept to pull off? And then what is my ability? And if you're a beginner to novice, leave the reflections out of it. It's so hard to pull off.
Right. Exactly. Okay, so what's the next section?
Next section is character design. What's the main thing we see with character?
The big thing I see with character design is very stiff poses. Well, I guess there's two parts. There's the design of the character, and then there's the personality of the character, right? And so you could do personality with a stick figure, right? So the design, there's no design. There's just 5 lines and a circle, and you could get all the personality you need from how you pose that character. And so I see people with great design, they'll design a character, beautiful design to the character, but there's zero personality to it. There's no personality in the pose. There's no personality in the eyes, in the expression. And so that's one of the big things that we see there. As far as the design side of it, a lot of times there's no thought given to overall cohesiveness to the design. You might introduce triangles on the face and on the head in the triangle shape, and then not see it anywhere else in the body. And so there's like this inconsistency to what you're thinking of on a shape level, right? So those are some of the things that I noticed, just off the top of pulling them off the top of the bag, whatever the saying goes.
Pulling them off the top of the bag. One of the things I see with character design that's tough to overcome is the 5 head. If you take a character design class, you'll know that your character's a certain amount of heads high. Fashion models, I think, are 9 heads high, if I'm not mistaken. A lot of times for kids' books, a character's 3 heads high, and that works really well. There's a weird in between an adult and a kid that's the 5 head tall character that is so difficult to make it work. Most of the time people do adults, but they just accidentally make the head too big, and it's just the most awkward sizing, and you might not know why your character doesn't look right. Count the head heights. If it's 5, you're going to have a tough time pulling it off. It's just something that I've noticed. It's just a weird little technicality.
Yeah. All right.
Will, you got anything for the character design and posing?
I think you guys hit it pretty good.
I will say that, along the lines of gesture, most of the time when you think you've pushed it too far, that's just enough to be right. I mean, if you think about a figure drawing class, if you really exaggerate it, it'll probably be closer to what the model's doing than if you try to nail it. Then everything tends to stiffen up, if that makes sense, and so kind of overshoot it. The next section is perspective. What's the biggest problem that you see with perspective?
I know what I have for this.
Oh, I got a couple on this one.
Biggest problem I see is placing the POV too high. All the time I see this one where, I want to draw this street scene or this room scene, and where the camera, the POV is up in the corner looking down on everything,
like a security camera, sort of.
Like a security camera, or it's if it's an outdoor scene or outside scene, it's too high to be a human, it's too low to be a bird. It's just like in this really nebulous area where you're like, where's this person standing that they're actually able to see from this?
That's a good one.
This direction.
I would say one of the things that people do a lot of times, especially this always happens right after you take a perspective class, is that you automatically assume, the artist automatically assumes that they need to use a vanishing point perspective system. There's so many ways to show space, and the basic design stuff is, what do we have? We got overlap. That's the first way you tell an object is in front of another object. There's a size discrepancy. A big object is closer to us. Small object is farther away. And there's atmospheric perspective where large contrast is in the front and then it fades as we go back. Think about if you're looking at mountains in the distance, they typically fade. So there's all these ways to show distance. You don't need to immediately pull out the ruler and start adding vanishing points. So start with all those first.
Another one, the big one for me is people getting their ellipses wrong. So they'll show like a hat on, they'll you can tell that the POV is straight on, like waist level maybe, because the belt has no, is flat, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we've established that. And then the hat will be you won't be looking under the hat, you'll be looking on top of it somehow. And you're like, that doesn't work.
Kind of mixing it up unintentionally, we should add, because you can have like a funny kind of quirky style, and like I mess with perspective all the time, but it's got to be intentional, otherwise it just looks plain wrong. Yeah.
And you'll look down at the feet, and they'll be flat as well. So there's no perspective change from the waist to the feet. So that's like, it's a big one I see people doing. I'm
going to add one more here just because this will save so many people bad art. Putting the vanishing points too close together. If you have a 2-point vanishing system, typically the vanishing points are way off the page. Otherwise, you get what Jake was talking about earlier, where it looks like a security camera. The closer you move the vanishing points together, the more wide angle a lens, to use a camera as an analogy or a system, the closer the vanishing points are together, the more wide angle the lens is. So if you do want to show somebody like looks like it's through a security camera, I bring the vanishing points really close together because it wildly distorts the scene. But in a normal shot, the vanishing point should be just way off the page. That's the easy way to do it, is just way off the page, and that'll clean that up.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
All right, next one is composition. What's the big one for you, Will?
Ooh, well, composition is such a huge category, but I would say people have a tendency to want to divide their picture in half, and they just don't use the rule of thirds, which is interesting because when you talk about art and how subjective it is, the first question I would have, I think, coming in would be like, hey, you can't put rules on my art. You know what I mean? Art is my expression. How dare you to think you can put rules on me, but there are certain aesthetics that we tend to, like beauty standards, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like people can look at people and rank them in the category of how attractive they are. Let's just take that for example.
So Lee, Jake, Will, in that order.
That's right.
That's exactly right.
Where does that come from? I would say I'd make a case that's in our DNA. It's in us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the same thing goes for when we look at fruit. We look at some fruit and we're like attracted to some and we're repelled by others. So we pick through. We don't just pick the first fruit that is in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
We dig around and try to find the better looking ones, the better shaped ones, the better color,
mm-hmm.
All those things. And so there are rules, and the composition section is basically a set of rules that will help you, if you follow them, will help you design a better, more aesthetically pleasing image, and help you with things like emphasis. A lot of people struggle with, conveying a really good focal point and
that's the
emphasizing
thing
that focal point.
that I always see. One of the big things I see is the focal point, or the thing that the story should be focused on, may not be the most the most easily identifiable this piece and part of the piece, right? I remember this. There was this illustration that we had just this last how to fix your art that was submitted, where the eagle was like the eagle was yelling at the little cadet eagles. It was like
the recruits,
the recruit eagles, and it was done in such a way that the eagle's mouth was really big, but it was surrounding this background element, like it was an
like
airplane,
a bridge or something.
Yeah. And the mouth was surrounding it, and all I could look at was the contrast between that yellow beak and the background of what that. I didn't even see at first who he was yelling at, and so, And so just figuring out what the emphasis needs to be and getting a very clean silhouette, light over dark, of composite, like have all the images, elements of the image pointing us towards what that thing is you want to have focused on.
That's good. One of the things I see, this is one of my first checklist items I ever had next to my desk, and that is avoiding tangents. For those of you guys who don't know what a tangent is, it's like if I take a picture of somebody and there is a tree behind them and the tree is coming out of their head, there's a tangent there. Or if somebody's walking on the bottom of the picture, like their feet are literally at the bottom, then that's a tangent with their feet in the edge of the picture frame. So basically where two objects come together awkwardly, sometimes it's a foreground background, sometimes it's everything's on the same plane, but they're just coming together awkwardly. So I literally scan inch by inch once I'm done with a composition, and I look, because they'll happen accidentally without you even thinking about it. Like a mountain in the background touching a cloud that's over it, it creates the weirdest little spot. So, and you can also use that for emphasis too. Like I would say that the potential tangent of like the Sistine Chapel is one of the best uses of an intentional tangent. They're almost touching, but not quite, and it creates just an electricity there. It's intentional. So these are tools, not rules. Sometimes you can use them to your advantage if you understand how they work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm looking up Sistine Chapel right now because I want to see what you're talking about.
It's where
the
God
hands.
and Adam
It's like that.
Oh, you're
famous-
talking about the Michelangelo painting. Yeah.
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 One
it
of the
definitely
best.
breaks the-
Michelangelo?
Michelangelo.
I thought it was
Wow,
Michelangelo.
It's because he plays pickleball. It's Mickleball.
Hey, man, I had art history teachers. They pronounced it Michelangelo, so that's
Maybe
what-
that's your-
Michelangelo played pickleball with pickleball.
Your next character is Michelangelo.
All right, drawing
So
is the next.
We only allow tangents in our conversation. That's the only place.
So drawing is up next.
Yep. So the thing I see with drawing, especially in beginning and amateur, is either being too too sketchy, scratchy. We're just going in there and every line is like 10 lines. Where you can't see my hand movement, but it's just making these back and forth sketchy, scritchy movements. So we see that, or we see like one line pushed very hard and very controlled. And what you need to do, what you should be doing is having that control with that loose mark making, right? So do 1, 2, or 3, find a flow to it, and don't. I would say, if you're doing those really, really sketchy lines, they're often too short. So you're gonna want like a longer line. This is getting really nitty gritty detail here with specific mark making, but that's like the very base thing. Keep it loose. Find the feel of the drawing, overall drawing, and how everything kind of relates to each other, and don't be too grippy on your pencil.
Yeah, I'll second that. I mean, their line quality is a huge contributor for the overall feeling of a piece. And I find a lot of times I have to, especially like this used to happen when I was teaching a lot, where I was teaching like a perspective class or something. And I did develop the ability to do a fairly straight line for a long distance. And I would get home, and that's not the way my personal illustrations look or work. And so I would make the line too straight and I'd have to erase it and wobble it. And it was a very conscious choice to what kind of line quality I have. I never was able to get my ink on top of a watercolor to blend that well until I started spraying it and having it bleed a lot. And then all of a sudden the line was a part of the watercolor. And so you're just going to have to experiment with what's the best line for the work that you want to make. Some people you can make an interesting illustration, but if you use just an even line weight the whole time and don't vary the mark at all, it's going to feel stiff and lifeless. So you got to do the work, put in the work there. It's no easy task, because whereas mine's wobbly, somebody else's might look unfinished. And so that's a tough thing to quantify when one person's finished work will look like a sketch and somebody else's finished work will be equally loose and it'll look like a finished piece. And that's a tough line to figure out.
Yeah.
No
I
pun
think
intended.
another thing with drawing is going to the finished stage too early. You know, so you get really excited about the face or something, or you know, details in the background or something like that, and you're getting in there and you're adding all this detail when you haven't figured out the rest of the character design or the drawing, and sometimes you can bake in you know, structural problems or design problems that you're going to be too attached to fix later. And
Because
so it's
time equals value. You gave your
exactly.
time. You gave lots of your time. And now you don't want to change that because it's got
Right.
value
Too
perceived
much
value. It doesn't have value.
Right.
It's
Perceived
your
value
work
is
is
the right
trash
word.
until it's amazing.
Exactly.
Next
Yep.
up is value, light, and shadow. I've got a really big one here. The number
Let's
one
hear
thing
it.
I see with beginning and intermediate artists is not understanding that local color exists or local value. Local value is the intrinsic value of something without highlights and shadow on it. Like, for example, if you're seeing a Cintiq pen, it's a dark object. And there's a little bit of highlight on it, but it's a dark object. So if I was going to draw this thing, I start with just making the whole thing pretty dark and then add the lighting on top of it. A lot of people just start shading as if everything was white. They don't start. Yeah, there you go. Will's holding up his iPad cover, which is black, and with lighting on it, it's a little bit gray, and then a white cup. You can't start. Those things would not be shaded the same. If you held up a black cup and a white cup, if you just added lighting to those, they'd look the same, but they're not the same. And so you have
If we
to
could
add,
sample these in Photoshop or in Procreate, we'd see that the darkest darks on the white object are probably about as light as the lightest lights on the dark object.
right, if not lighter, not lighter. So just once you start to see the world in that way, everything changes in terms of your painting ability and your drawing ability if you're going to tone something.
Yeah.
The people will take a black object that isn't shiny, that's matte, and they'll put white highlights on it.
Right. It'll never be white.
Yeah.
It'll be at
Right.
best gray, like Will's microphone right there. There's a highlight on it. It's a matte, like kind of a satin object. Its value at the highlight is about 50%. So the shinier an object is, the lighter the highlight will be, but its local value will be dark.
And to go with that, speaking of highlight, is one of the other big mistakes is highlighting everything, like putting little
Right.
hot highlights on everything, because it looks so cool, right? You just want to keep adding it. Like, oh, the toe needs a highlight, you know?
Right. It's an interesting idea because, like, if you take a lighting class, typically you'll start with a ball and they'll show you all the qualities of light that falls on a ball. But what tends to happen is people don't realize that as you scale up a scene, the lighting becomes less in terms of what you add. So on a ball, there's your highlight, there's your lighting, there's the local color, there's the core shadow, the shadow side, the contact shadow, the reflected light, and the cast shadow. So those are all the pieces of light that fall across a ball. But if you're doing an outdoor scene with a house in a neighborhood, if you add all that stuff to everything in the scene, it looks insane. It's just so complicated with lighting. And we've seen some illustrators who just like, okay, I learned lighting. Now they added reflected light to blades of grass. And it becomes so confusing. So as the camera pulls out and the scene gets bigger, your lighting becomes smaller. And by the time you're doing a neighborhood, it's what's lit and what's in shadow, and that's it. There's no highlights and all that stuff.
You know, I think where a lot of drawing teachers make a mistake is they only use a white ball or cone or cube to draw
That's
from.
true.
They don't they don't put a white ball next to a black one so you can analyze and see the different
Right.
values on each. So students go away thinking that everything has the same value, and you get these drawings where everything, like you're talking about local value, where everything has the same local value. these worlds where, you know what I mean, where
Yeah.
where skin is the same local value as a black bowling ball is the same value.
It's
as
all white, basically.
Yeah.
They're just shading
Yeah.
white objects. It looks really weird once you see it. A lot of beginners won't see it like, oh yeah, that looks like a realistic scene until
Right.
you put it next to somebody who understands that concept.
Right.
All right, the next
Absolutely.
topic we've got is let's take just a quick moment, by the way. So what we're talking about is how to fix your art. We've got this 210-page document that addresses all the stuff that we're talking about here. The price is $89 for this, and it includes the 210-page PDF. It includes 9 hours of video instruction from each instructor. We had 4 instructors, us 3 plus David Hone, build this document, and then it's each of those instructors doing the full lecture on, how to use each section. And then
Yeah.
there's the checklist. And so just wanted to throw that out there. And that's available at SVSLearn.com. If you go to classes, it's the first one listed, and you can grab that thing. Okay, go ahead, Will. Color.
Oh my gosh, color. Well, I was already alluding to this earlier. Is the biggest mistake that I see people doing with color is not choosing it to tell story. So, and I have a class at SVSLearn.com, choosing colors for storytelling, because what they'll do is often they'll choose colors arbitrarily, and then they lock themselves into color choices that don't tell the story, or that miss opportunities to tell story, or that distract from the story. And it's hard to actually talk about this without showing examples, but yeah, we go through, like how to choose colors for, like where to start. Because, you've got your drawing and you're like, well, the kid's shirt could be blue, it could be green, it could be red, it could be all these other things, right? Well, if the kid has red hair, you probably don't want to choose a red or orange shirt to go with it,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying absolutely, because there would be times where that would work. I'm sure there's exceptions to that. Maybe it's a story about a kid who had red hair and red shoes and red socks and red, you know what I mean? Like, but that's probably the biggest mistake that I see. And also, like I mentioned before, oversaturating colors that should be muted and not saturating enough in areas of focal point.
Really good. Really good.
Yeah.
One of the things I see that a lot of students don't do, that I learned the kind of midway through my college, and it was a game changer, was keying an illustration. And what I mean by that is, what's the main, if you look at like a movie poster, for example, just go ahead and, for those of you guys who are in front of your computer, go ahead and Google movie posters. You'll see that it's mainly a blue poster, or mainly an orange poster. I'm getting a call. Or mainly like a yellow, it's keyed to, blue, green, or whatever. And then all your colors within the illustration harmonize with that main color. But if you looked at a thumbnail, you'd say, oh, that's a blue-green painting. That's a purple painting. And once you start doing that, you avoid the problem of what Will was saying. Well, the sky is blue, the barn is red, the grass is green, the tractor's yellow. All of a sudden you get this like rainbow effect. You don't want that. You want to key each one to a certain kind of color hue, and then balance everything out within that hue. It's almost like just creating a color haze or something, or like a slight filter to it. One of the best movies I've seen that showed an example of this was that movie Amelie. It's old now, but if you check it out, there's some of the director's stuff, and they're talking to the cinematographer, and they have a side by side, unedited video versus color keyed, and man, it just makes a huge difference. And speaking of the color keys, if you look at like the Art of Monsters Inc. or something, they've got all the whole color script. If you'll notice that every scene throughout the whole movie is keyed to a certain very simple palette.
Yeah, so that is definitely another thing where people they use too many colors is kind of what I hear you saying.
Yeah, exactly. But they use all the colors because everything in life is a different color, and you got to figure out a way to control that.
Yep.
Our last section we're going to get to today is rendering. Will, you're the biggest renderer of the three. What's your biggest pet peeve of rendering?
Probably over rendering is a big one where people make You know, if you think about some of the best figure drawings that you've seen, or head studies, where artists will allow hair, all the superfluous parts of the drawing. Sometimes it's legs and arms to kind of go really loose in the drawing, and then they really tighten up on certain areas. So you have really tight areas of rendering and really loose areas of rendering. If you render everything to the same degree, then you're emphasizing everything. So everything in illustration is about, you can control emphasis with value. You can control emphasis with color. You can control emphasis with rendering and, your texture, your rendering texture. And if the texture is the same everywhere, then you're basically emphasizing everything. Now, there's some nuance to that because you can render everything the same and still have it turn out. There's some artists that I'm thinking of right now, like Chris Van Allsburg, who's very successful. Beth Cromis, who won the Caldecott a few years ago, everything is rendered to the same degree throughout. They control emphasis with those other things, with color and value.
Right.
But in general, I would say over-rendering is a big problem because people spend all this time rendering things that are just not important.
Right. And to add to that, I'm going to totally agree with you. But to give another example, one thing that I see a lot is the over rendering of building materials. For example, if when you guys are driving around, or if you're in your car right now listening to this, look around and try to find a building made of brick. How far away or how close do you have to get before you start seeing individual bricks? But I see people drawing every brick in a building, and they'll be, in the illustration, it'll be like a mile away. Right. You're not going to see individual bricks. You might see a slight texture on the building and maybe a hint of, some variance of color
Same
and value.
with
but
trees and bushes.
Yeah.
Right. Well, how close do you got to get to see a leaf?
Right.
That's a great,
Right.
great
And the
thing
problem
to think about.
is our mind is we draw what we know rather than what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you want to edit out a lot of the texture, a lot of the detail that is just over rendered. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a tough one to figure out
another
too. Because
another one with that is inconsistent rendering. Where you're like people have a real problem with water. Let's say water textures, right?
Mm-hmm.
They'll draw everything else has got really good shape and form. They get to water, and all of a sudden, they just start or hair, and they just start making really random, chaotic marks.
Yeah,
because what's happening is their brain has not figured out that you can draw water, complex objects like water, hair, feathers.
Mm-hmm.
Things that have have lots of parts, and in the case of water, lots of undulating waves and movement and stuff, and reduce it down to simple shape, shadow, shape, value. All of those complex things can be reduced. So that's where a lot of people will have a great story idea, a great composition, really good characters, really good drawing. And then they get down to rendering, good perspective, all those things. They get down to rendering, and it falls apart in certain areas because they haven't learned to think about those complex objects as designing them just like anything else, with shape and reducing them down.
I see that a lot with people drawing. I think it's because we've seen so many landscape paintings. The background will be loosely painted, and then the character will be super tightly painted, and so they don't look like they're part of the same world. And that's a tough one to figure out. If you're going to be a loose painter, how to paint your character loose and still show detail. If you're doing like a children's book, like what if your character's holding a key, but you have a really loose landscape style, but you got to show this small little thing. It's tough to figure that out. So I understand where the problem is, but you got to work through how to do that for your particular style.
They need to look at Greg Manchess's work.
Perfect. That's a perfect. Seriously, he's great at it. He's fantastic at that specific thing.
And that's a problem. I know early on, artists really lean heavy on their influences, And if you are too narrow in who's influencing your work, so if you just want to do art like John Klassen, when you face a design problem that he hasn't tackled yet, you're at a loss sometimes at how to go about doing that. So it's good to, like for example, I haven't seen him do, how would John Klassen design a kangaroo? You know, we haven't seen
Right.
his kangaroo before. Now, there's a particular way he would absolutely do a kangaroo, but because he hasn't done one, now it's up to you to kind of like figure that out. If you're trying to be, a John Klassen style artist, and that's why you got to take in 5-20 different artists and really absorb their stuff, because then there's going to be different ways to solve problems that you've seen other artists do, and you can kind of cobble those together to make your own solution.
Yeah. I'll tell you this is unrelated, or it's related but not related to how you fix your art. With drawing a kangaroo specifically, whenever you're drawing an animal, you're forced at some point to deal with the legs, the back legs in particular. Are you going to do the realistic kind of leg where the knee's in the back and it kind of goes, looks like a backwards leg? Or do you do a humanized leg where the leg, it's just coming, like if I was drawing a dog, all the legs look sort of like the front legs. You know what I mean? They're just coming down. The kangaroo is right in the middle. Like because the exaggerated way the body fits on the legs, I'll never draw a kangaroo because I don't draw the realistic rounded backwards leg, like natural realistic animal legs. I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. I would have to do days of character design to draw a stupid kangaroo leg. So, you'll never see me draw a kangaroo.
And that's the case for, there needs to be this balance. That's actually one thing that I probably don't do enough of is I'm usually like creating at the last minute. This thing's due tomorrow. I gotta like go in there and do some stuff. And so I will design on the page. I won't do like pre concept art for it. And sometimes you need 5 pages of sketches to really figure out how something looks.
Yeah. Jake's showing Gregory Manchester, by the way, if you're not watching the YouTube, he's incredible at doing loosely implied detail where you know exactly what everything is. It's an incredible skill, really.
Amazing.
And
it's because if it's what else is cool about like light over darks, just knowing your values so well. I remember I worked at this studio and they had a library of books, and I pulled down one, it said NC Wyeth on the jacket of one of them. Like, oh sweet, I want to look at, this big thick NC Wyeth book. I pull it out and I start flipping through, and it's like it's an old book. And so most of the images were in black and white. And I'm like, come on, he's a color painter. Why would you make a black and white, book of this? But what was interesting was every single one of his paintings held up in black and white. You could still see the emphasis. You could still see, the subtlety. Things need to be subtle were subtle. And I realized right then there, like, just what a great illustrator he was, because it didn't matter. The color didn't matter in his paintings.
Yeah. He was a master of this kind of stuff. Definitely he was probably somebody that Greg Manchester was looking at. So I remember going to the Louvre or somewhere. I can't remember. We were in France, and I saw some N.C. Wyeth painting from, I think it was Treasure Island or something. And there was this parrot that was in the scene. And I remember seeing this image before online. And when I was in person, I looked at it. It was like 3 or 4 brush strokes. I mean, there was nothing there in reality. And you back up 2 feet and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, there's a parrot. It's amazing.
See, some of that stuff really, it only comes from 20 years of painting,
Yeah. Master.
Or I shouldn't say 20 years of painting. I should say 1,000 paintings. However long it takes you to get there.
60 years of painting. Yeah, exactly.
You know what I've noticed about Greg too is how accessible he is to students, and how humble he is. He's at the top of his game, and he's just super, like encouraging to other students. Like, look, you got it. Here's what you got to do, and if you do it, you'll just get better and better. And
And he'll look at people's work. I saw him speak at a college in Portland, and he was actually pitching that book. That was a lot of those paintings are from that kind of Arctic book with the bear. And yeah, he was totally willing to look at students' work. Yeah, it's such a nice guy, cool guy.
Yeah. All right, should we wrap it up?
Let's wrap it up. You guys check out How to Fix Your Art if you don't mind. We'll put a link in the description here, and it's worth it. We're very happy with it. You guys happy with it?
Oh yeah,
super happy with it. It's incredible. It's one of those things I keep saying. I wish I had this.
We
20
all
years
wish
ago.
we had it.
You know?
Yeah, I'd be 6 years ahead, seriously, or maybe I've gotten a book deal where I didn't get a book deal because I didn't have the right. Something wasn't right. That's the hard part when you get stuck.
Right. Every third Thursday is when we do the live stream. Every month we have a prompt for you to follow and submit your artwork. And I should note that in December it's going to be the second Thursday, just so we don't bump into Christmas stuff. So
yeah, the concept this month is, if you want to enter, is Rock Fortress.
And by the way, what we do is we pick. Sometimes we pick one and all three of us fix it and show our fix in that broadcast. Sometimes we'll pick 3 individuals. We'll try to go through the art and let everybody kind of look at what everybody's done. We did get some comments where people are like, how come you don't critique them all? The last broadcast was an hour and a half and we only critiqued 3. How many days would it take us to get through all of them?
Well, I mean, the truth is, if you do something, everybody wants theirs to be shown, and they will not be happy unless it's shown. But there's just no way we could do it. It's too hard.
Right.
And let me just do this because let me answer one of the comments. They'll probably never hear it, but one of the comments was, "Why don't you make a comment about each one? Just a quick comment." And my response to that is, I've seen artists quit the business because of a flippant comment, out of context, or, if we, I feel like when you go through that effort of making a piece of art, you don't deserve a flippant comment, just
some quick hit, like, we have to say
Yeah.
something about it. So here's what we're going to say.
Because there's no way we can give you the compliments you deserve and the critique you deserve in a quick hit. I'd rather not do it at all. I don't want to discourage anybody.
That's a good point.
All right. I'll take us out. Thank you for joining us today, everybody. 3-Point Perspective is made possible by SVSLearn.com. We're becoming a great illustrator starts. And your hosts today were Lee White, Will Terry, and Jake Parker. You can find us at our respective social media accounts. Stop in, give us a DM if you have any questions or whatever. Podcast produced by Daniel Tu. That's danieltu.co. It's his website. Keeper of the curriculum, Austin Shirtliff. Shownotes wrangler, Lily Howell. Chief Operations Officer, Lisa Fott. Now, go draw something.
So the reason I didn't stay in Brotique is because I had a family and I was the sole income provider. And the proposition from publishing is this. And it's no different than it's no different than making anything. It's you make something, we'll decide if it's good. If it's good, we'll give you a contract. Right? That's the same as if you approached Procter and Gamble with a product and said, "Hey, I have an idea for a product." They'd say, "Well, tell us what it is." Sure, we'll sign an NDA. If you invent anything, right? That's the proposition. But the problem for me was it's expensive to be an inventor, aka author, right? Because the author is the one that starts the whole thing in motion, right? The author is the one that concepts the idea.
Right.
If you're an author, even if you're an author illustrator, you have to have the idea first and you have to write the story first. So the author initiates. And it's expensive to initiate because while you're initiating, you're not working a job, right? You're not getting paid. And that was why I quit our critique group that we affectionately call Brotique, because it was just a bunch of guys. I realized I was in it for a year and a half, 2 years, and there were guys that were way ahead of me who were already getting contracts and stuff, and then Jed Henry had his book that he thought was going to do really well, and it did okay, but it didn't win awards. It didn't make the school library journal list or whatever. And so he just decided, that's it, I'm out. I'm going to go do my other thing. That's when he did Ukiyo-e Heroes. But when he left, after having successfully written and illustrated a book for a major publisher, and he did the math early on, right? Like, he wanted to make bucks. He knew where he wanted to go financially. He was like, I'm not going to gamble on this publishing thing. I'm going to go gamble on myself and make a thing. And what has he made? A couple $100,000 a year doing Ukiyo-e Heroes?
More than that.
More than that. So
Wow.
he just decided, like, I'm going to go get the money. It's like Charles Barkley. I'm going to go get the ball. And that's when I decided, yeah, I got to go get the money. I can't wait for this thing that may happen, that might happen. I write a story, and they're like, yeah, it's good, but not good enough. We don't like it or whatever. I write another one. And each time, because I'm also the illustrator, I'm making a book dummy. And I just saw the writing on the wall. I couldn't tell my wife, like, hey, I'm going to take off and not really make any money for a couple years, and we're just going to go in the poorhouse. And at the end of that, maybe I'll have a book that does well.
Well, let me just add to this loveliness. I don't know if this will be on the podcast or not, but if it is, let's just go ahead and throw it out there. I mean, here's the business deal that we agreed to. I mean, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, because if you ask somebody who's, let's just say Will sold his book, and I say, hey, Will, what kind of contract you get? Oh, I got the standard one. I get anywhere from 5 to 10%. Typically now it's going to be of net proceeds, not list, but that's
don't forget the advance.
Number conversation. Yeah. You get a certain advance. But for this product, Will came up with an idea. Will illustrated the idea. Will wrote the book. Now the publisher has said, I like that. We'll basically distribute it. And in exchange for this, you get, the way that illustrators talk about it is, I get 5%, I get 10%. But what the unsaid thing is, the publisher's getting 90 to 95% of your product that you wrote, that you invented. What other business would have somebody say, hey, I created a widget and I produced the widget, I concepted it, I built the prototype, here it is, and then the distributor says, oh, I like that, I'll buy it for 90% of your business. Nobody does. If you watch Shark Tank, which I do, I like Shark Tank just because I like the deals and stuff. It's considered aggressive if typically the person who came up with the widget, the product, asks for X amount of money in exchange for. They typically ask for 5 to 10% of their business. The sharks won't have that. The sharks are considered greedy if they ask for 25% of the company. But the publishers are taking 90% of our product.
So
and we're begging for that. We love it.
I just looked it up. It says in the NBA, players receive 50% of all revenue. So they're dividing up half.
Nice.
So they divide half of NBA's revenue with all the players,
right? And the other half
okay.
runs the NBA.
Well, the difference is though the NBA that they're making money from 5 different sources, and like if you look at the worst NBA player, they're making $2 million or whatever.
They usually, I think the multiplier isn't it 5 times their salary in endorsements?
It could be. I mean, if you think about like a bit player who's on the bench most of the time, he's not getting much endorsements. I mean, of course, there's the 1%ers, just like in our business. There's John Klassen, there's Dan Santat, who just won a book award, by the way. Congrats, Dan, and Peter Brown. And then that's the top tier. I mean, there's probably a couple more that I can't think of right off the top of my head. And then there's everyone else.
Yeah.
So we use them as the guide for what's happening, but they aren't the guide. They're the exception.
Right. The NFL pays out 48% of the revenue to the players. So almost the same. 48% 0.8%.
Yeah.
Well, but that's divided between so many people. I mean, there's how many people on a baseball team?
Well,
28 people.
but to our point, it doesn't really matter. There's tons of illustrators, tons of authors, and tons of NFL players, and they're taking half of what comes in and dividing it to the players. We are getting,
and that's in addition
5
to their
10
salary, right?
Yeah, we're getting 5 to 10% of what comes in is going back to the artist. So you're right.
So-
There's a why. Okay, so why is it that way?
It's because there's no illustration union.
There's
We
no
can't-
union. There
we can't
needs to be a
organize
union.
and strike.
Let's rile
We can't
Will
bring
up.
the
we need a
the
union.
publishing world to its knees.
Well, the
By no-
problem is you have a sort of a culture of being poor. There's the starving artist. There's a romanticism of our industry that's really weird. That's like, oh, you're working, but you must be so happy doing that, and we are happy doing that. But we shouldn't be penalized financially because we enjoy our job. Other people like their job and they make a bunch of money. It's almost like we should give a discount because we like it. I don't understand.
You know what I think it is? I think it's something totally different. I think that in sports, you can either catch the ball or you can't. You can either throw the ball or you can't. You can either dunk the ball or you can't. With art, it's so subjective. And, publishers, they track our sales, but they don't really know why a book tanked. They don't know if it's the illustrations. They don't know if it's the story. Don't you think? It's like some books do really well and resonate and others don't, and you can't predict it, really.
Let me add, before I forget this point, I want to add this to our industry since I was kind of writing it as a business model earlier. The publisher takes 90 to 95%. They do little to no advertising for most books. If you're Dan Santat, you will get a lot of advertising, your book's facing out. Little to no advertising. And then this is the weird gotcha moment in publishing that they don't do any advertising, so your book doesn't sell that well. And then you write another book while this book is sort of just sitting out there, and illustrate another book. And let's just say by lottery ticket chances, they pick that one as well. Well, then they look back at the first one that they bought and they say, okay, let's base your advance on the sales from the first one. Even though they didn't advertise it, they didn't sell it, they were putting out hundreds of books into the market. You're now judged against it, even as an illustrator. Like for books that I've illustrated that other people wrote that didn't connect with people, I'm judged on those sales numbers.
Right. Me
That
too.
seems crazy to me. I wish the metric should be show me the sales numbers versus the advertising budget and efforts.
On one of my
Right.
books, I tried to tell my publisher, I don't think the story idea is good enough to sell. I didn't write it. And I gave them another idea, and it didn't fly, which I thought was way better, had more market appeal. And that book tanked real bad. And so it's a blight on me.
Right.
And I had to do it because it was under contract, because it was a book deal, a multi-book deal. So yeah, it's an interesting business to be in. However, when things go great, they go amazingly great too, right?
Well, that's the lottery aspect of it. Is it's hard if
But-
you self-publish something. It's hard to make it go "quote unquote" viral, and sometimes books do, but how many do?
Remember when we were talking about this? Did you have some, Jake?
I was just going to say, what's the recourse for someone who doesn't want to play the publishing lottery? They
self-publish.
self-publish, but now you're wearing 25 hats instead of one hat. And I would say, like, look at Benji Davies, right? He's not the A-list tier bookseller, children's book illustrator seller, but his books are consistently selling, right? They made a play based on one of his books. He's made a series, right?
I think he's
just a
bigger
guy
than you
who's-
think he is.
No, he is bigger. I know he's bigger than how I made him sound right there. But you didn't list him next to John Klassen
Right.
Dan
I would
Santat and
say
Peter
if those
Brown.
guys are the A plus tier, and then Benji
Yeah.
Davis is just the A tier. And then I think there's because if you
And
look
then there's
at
the other guys.
the one thing that Benji Davis has, I want to say Davis, but it's Davies, right?
Davies, yeah.
What he has is, if you go to his website, there's the Storm Whale, which did really well.
Mm-hmm.
Then that's the one that everybody knows. There's a bunch of books that people sort of liked, but it's not as well known as that one. And then he's got this like 4 kids series that sold. I can't remember what the number is, but
5
like
million copies.
5 million. So that's his ticket. He's already so the stuff that he's doing for picture books really, in my opinion, is like an art. It doesn't matter how much that makes, as long as he's doing the bread and butter stuff. He's out there doing this, good stuff for the publisher too. So they're giving him a long leash. In other words, I guarantee you, if you have a board book, let's just say it's a board book that lists things like, oh, here's a lamp and this is a couch, and that thing sells 5 million copies, I bet your children's book's going to be accepted.
Right. And so the I think there's multiple different ways to play this game, right? So one of them is, I give up, I'm just going to self-publish, I don't want to deal with publishers. The other one is, I'm going to make something as marketable as possible, or position myself as the go-to guy for really marketable stuff, to essentially, I'll do 3 books for you if I get to do 1 book for myself. 3 books for you, 1 book for myself, or some sort of balance, yeah, like that. And I think
commercial. That's what actors do. A lot of actors do that.
Yeah,
they'll do the commercial, Aquaman, and then they'll do the kind of art house film. Doesn't pay as much, but
so they can afford to do the art house film, right? So
well, I wonder if the model isn't making that deal with the publisher, but in my opinion, that's the deal to make with yourself. Like, basically, I'll do a commercial project 1 year, and then I'll do a self-published project that's a little more art house, little edgier, and then go balance them back and forth. Some people still live in the old world where they think either you're doing one or the other, but I don't see why both things aren't possible at the same time.
Right. And I think,
because then you can acknowledge the pros and the cons at the same time,
Yeah. I think people have more time and ability than they think they do. Like, you can, if you have a long view of, like, say, a decade, if you think in decades or in 5-year chunks, or even in quarters of a year instead of day to day, you can get so much more stuff done working a couple hours a day, before or after your day job. And it's incredible what actually gets accomplished when you just show up and you keep chipping away at it. And instead of like, oh, I have to feed an algorithm, I have to post a drawing every day, I have to post finished work all the time, that's a full-time job. If you just come out with something really well done and well crafted once a year, once every 2 years, that adds up over the course of a decade, And you look back, those 10 years are going to go by, whether, you're making stuff or not. And you want to look back and say, look at these 5 amazing books I made over the last 10 years. That's something that people can be like, wait a minute. What have you been doing?
Right. True.
Well, historically, where I think, where I think this, the reason for the discrepancy between other industries and how little ours pays is because when the big publishers got going, it was kind of like network TV, and it was, these companies that had money and the little guy, and to offer the little guy 5 or 10% of the massive amount of sales, because there wasn't as much noise as there is today. So they would sell 50,000 copies of something, and getting 5 or 10% of that is a huge payday. 100,000 copies, and you're a celebrity in your
and
your
it
town,
used to all be list. I'll add that too, because there was no net. And for those of you guys who don't know what we're talking about with that statement, list is very simple. I'll just do some easy math. If a book costs $10 and you get 10% of the list price of it, you get $1. Right? They've changed that now to what? To 10% net. And what that means is
what
the
they
book
net.
sells for $10, and then after their costs and distribution and travel and storage and all that stuff, so you're off a $10 book. It used to be you get $1, now you get a nickel. That's how dramatic that contract is. That contract change.
Well, I think something's going to have to give at some point here, because you got Brandon Sanderson launching his $43 million Kickstarters that gets everybody in publishing like, oh, wait a minute, he
made
doesn't
how
need
much?
us. He didn't need us to do
Direct-to-market,
that.
yeah.
Well, you get the lowest $600,000 sketchbook. I mean, how much would you know? Yeah, I was
Well, and
having
a publisher-
this conversation with my agent, and we were talking about Eric Carle, like how much has Eric Carle made from publishing? Oh my God, millions and millions of dollars. Well, again, he's one of the lottery winners with the Hungry Caterpillar. But then also, how much would Eric Carle have made if he self-published that book?
Well,
and it
that's the
got
thing.
equally
If you
successful?
look at Hungry Caterpillar, I wonder.
I mean, it's always just in the best of list. You know, if you get a book that's
Total
in the
sales.
best of list for 40 years straight in the top 10, you're going to do okay.
So 50 million copies of Hungry Caterpillar. At,
15
and
or 50?
50. And let's just do some simple math here and say that
a reason he has a
each
museum.
book sold for $20 because there's all the franchising that went with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's 50 million times 20?
Oh my
That's
gosh.
500. That's $1 billion, right? Isn't it? Yeah, that's
Not
$1
too
billion.
shabby.
That's $1 billion. Okay, so how much did he get? He got
100 million.
100 million. They got 90 million, 900 million. So the publisher got 900 million. He got 100 million.
Who's the publisher for that?
I think that was Simon & Schuster, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure.
And how much is their Manhattan skyscraper rent a month? $1 million a month, something like that.
Well, like Will said, though, when it came out, it was different. I mean, when I was...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I don't want to talk about Eric Carle. Let's talk about who's selling 60 million books today, and that's Dave Pilkey with his Dogman series. 60 million Dogman books.
Wow.
Or there's their Harry Potter kind of... I mean, there's a few people that have done that. The J.K. Rowling, and
Yeah.
she got a castle. She owns an island. I mean, it happens.
Diary of a Wimpy Kid, too.
Yeah,
Right.
so 5 or 10% of a $1 billion project is quite a bit of money, and that's my point. That's where this whole percentage thing started. Was in the like when I did Pizza Pat, my agent said they sell these in the book clubs, and you should take this book because they can sometimes sell over 1 million copies of them. Well, they didn't sell 1 million; they sold 600,000. 600,000 copies.
Mm-hmm.
It gave me really good paychecks for 10 years
Mm-hmm.
at 3%,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where,
Mm-hmm.
That's where the system worked. Because if you're getting a good check in the mail, and by a good check, I don't mean like life-changing money, but I mean like I did 2 months worth of work, and for the next 10 years, every 6 months, I would get anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000.
Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you repeat that and you have a bunch of books,
Mm-hmm.
so that's where this came from. It just
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work when the numbers get really low. I guess
Right.
that's what we're saying. Yeah.
So, a healthy economy means you have a healthy middle class, which means that there's people able to level up from lower class to middle class. It's not impossible to do that. And it means that there's money trickling down from, or the upper class is sharing essentially the wealth to the middle class, right? So you have this very healthy middle class means you have a healthy economy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all I know about economics. But
That was great.
yeah, no,
Buy
but
low, sell high.
think about in comic books, in children's books, in publishing across the board, you do not, I don't see that healthy middle class. What I see is a large lower class of people who are making $4,000, $5,000, $30,000 a year from publishing. And then it skips there's no like 300,000, and then it all of a sudden jumps up, or there's a
Right.
very little people who are making 300,000, dentist money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then jumps to 500,000, a million, 800,000. So, I- you know, the solution here, I think, is some sort of shift in how publishing does business, so that I think, and maybe it's just easier for them to make way more money with fewer books. You know, you really only have to market 2 books or 3 books or 10 books, and you can make just as much money as if you spend all of that marketing power on 1,000 books and have 1,000 books sell. So I don't know how you solve this problem.
Yeah. My theory is that because they're getting 90% of the revenue, they turn around and they use that to publish more books. So they stay on top because they basically can waste money on
Yeah.
books that they don't know will make it, but it doesn't matter because they're getting so much that they can just, put money behind the ones that tend to do well. The ones that break out, then they market those. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Let's start this episode.
Let's do it.